Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone from somewhere humid and rainy in New York City. I'm Tiffany. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager at Clubhouse, and I'll be your host for today's SOC 2 discussion. So we're going to chat about everyone's favorite topic, SOC 2 compliance. We're very happy to have Justin Betteridge, the CTO and founder at Solvvy, with us to share his SOC 2 journey, and Eric Martin, who's the head of sales and one of the SOC 2 experts over at Vanta. So a quick backstory of how this webinar came about. The SOC 2 audit process can be a tricky one to navigate. And the good news is there are a lot of options, but that can also make it more confusing. Clubhouse went through our SOC 2 compliance journey back in 2019, and we used Vanta to manage the process with a lot of success. One of our engineers, Christine, wrote a great blog post detailing our experience, and it was one of our most popular posts. And many of our customers who are contemplating a SOC 2 audit reach out wanting to learn more. And so Eric and I were chatting about how we could better share our experiences with a larger audience. And that's when we realized that one of our shared customers, Solvvy, had just completed their SOC 2 audit. So we thought we would all hop on a call together and share our different experiences with our audience. So before we jump into everything, let me review how you can participate in today's event. You can submit your questions using the Q&A button on the control panel, and we'll address as many as we can at the end. So now I'd like to introduce you to the other folks here. First up is Justin, and as I mentioned before, Justin is the CTO and founder at Solvvy. And a little known fact about Justin is his 13-year-old son can unfortunately barely beat him at ping pong. We also have Eric, and Eric is the head of sales at Vanta. And a fun fact about Eric is he lived in Saudi Arabia for 3 years immediately after completing his undergrad at UCSB. And it's only fair that I share a fun fact about myself. So before I started a career in technology and marketing, I briefly pursued a career as a talent agent. So let's get to it. So before we dive into everything SOC 2, I thought we could each briefly share a bit more about the organizations we represent. Justin, thank you again for being here. Can you tell everyone listening a bit more about Solvvy?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Tiffany. And thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be talking with you today about this. So Solvvy is a conversational platform that allows you to scale your support operations and meet your customers' expectations by helping them immediately get answers to their questions or resolve their issues. And we also allow you to personalize the support experience and intelligently transition the user to interact with an agent using the most appropriate channel if they were not able to self-serve. And since we're talking about security and compliance, Solvvy's, I just want to give you a peek at Solvvy's tech stack. So we primarily use Google Cloud Platform, everything running in Kubernetes. We have React.js on the front end and Node.js and Python on the back end. And as far as tooling goes, we actually rely heavily on Clubhouse and Notion and Slack to communicate and organize and manage everything that we do. And but because we actually deal with customer support questions that flow through our system, our clients are very interested in security and compliance, and therefore we take it very seriously. So that's why we're talking today.
Awesome. Eric, thank you for being here as well. Can you tell us a bit more about Vanta?
Yeah, really. Well, happy to be here first off. So Vanta is a cybersecurity and compliance company. I guess before all of this happened, based in San Francisco. What we've done is we built software to help make it easier for companies to prepare for and then actually go get different compliance reports or certificates. We've started with SOC 2, and over the next couple months, we'll be rolling out products and support for folks that need HIPAA, ISO 27001, and from there, we'll expand based on customer demand. But excited to talk about SOC 2 today.
Cool, thanks, Eric. And a little bit more about Clubhouse. So Clubhouse is a project management software that's fast, flexible, and easy to use while still delivering on power. We like to think of ourselves as the collaborative home for software development because it brings not just developers into the tool, but everyone on the team that's helping to build their products. So as a result, it makes it easier and more enjoyable to plan and build and track with your team. So Clubhouse can be a great way to manage your SOC 2 audit and track and move along the work that needs to be done. So Before we dive into Solvvy's SOC 2 experience, Eric, can you give us a quick overview of what SOC 2 is?
Yep. So I like to describe it as a cybersecurity compliance report that companies can get that, for better or worse, they can deliver to prospects, partners, customers to communicate that they are, safe to do business with. There are technical components, there are non-technical components, I guess this is where Vanta comes into play, where we are able to run tests against both and demonstrate to our audit partners that you as a business are doing the things that you're supposed to do. And so SOC 2 generally takes two flavors. There's a SOC 2 type 1 and a SOC 2 type 2. Very simply put, a SOC 2 type 1 is a point in time report. More often than not, what's involved there from a kind of execution standpoint is you as a business are kind of laying out the different processes and procedures that you follow to demonstrate that you are operating, let's call it securely or safely. A SOC 2 type 2 is a continuous report. The main difference is that for a SOC 2 type 2, a company is going to have what's called an observation period. That's where a continuous monitoring solution like Vanta is checking to make sure that you're adhering to these processes and procedures for 3, 6, 12 months, et cetera. So yeah.
So when customers are thinking about choosing between the two types, how should they approach that?
Yeah, so the advice that we give our sales team is ask the prospect, hey, what are your prospects, customers, or partners asking for? What have you committed to giving to them? More often than not, if you're being asked to get a SOC 2, if you ask them specifically, do I need a type 1 or type 2, they will tell you. And so whether you need a type 1, a type 2, and or both, a software solution like Vanta can help you get there. There are certain sub-industries, like if you're a fintech company, for example, where it's just table stakes based on how you're working with, your financial partners, you're going to need a type 2. But for the most part, the safe answer is if you're getting asked for this, go ask that partner, that prospect, that customer explicitly like which SOC 2 report you need and go from there. There are pros and cons to both, right? Like many of the companies we work with are early stage, and if they can get away with just getting a type 1 out of the gates, they can do that much more quickly. And it affords them more time to kind of focus on building their business. If you need the type 2, we still allow you to get that efficiently, but it just requires a little more kind of heeding or kind of paying attention to over that observation period.
Got it. So Justin, can you talk more about what prompted Solvvy's SOC 2 audit process and then how you all decided on which type to go after?
Yeah, so from the beginning, our customers actually would ask us to often go through these security reviews during our trial or onboarding process. And the reason is because we potentially have access to sensitive information in the customer support inquiries. So even though we actually don't store any personal information in our system because it's not needed for our product, we do have access to it because we integrate directly with our customers' CRM systems to submit the tickets when the user is not able to self-service through Solvvy. So from the beginning, we had to go through these security reviews. And for anyone who's familiar with that process, it can become quite involved and require a lot of back and forth. And we came to understand that in some cases, actually, this was only required because we actually hadn't achieved any kind of official compliance certification. So even though we organically had many of the proper controls and processes in place, we actually didn't have that rubber stamp of approval that could instantly communicate that to our customers. So after a while, and I would say we were probably somewhat late in the game just because it wasn't necessarily like demanded or required by our customers. We actually got through a lot of security reviews without having it, but once we got to like 100 plus clients, we decided that we needed to really scale and make this go faster and more smoothly. And so that's why we decided to go ahead and take the first step and get the SOC 2 type 1 audit. But we're actually going to do type 2 very soon as well.
Yeah, that sounds pretty similar to why Clubhouse decided to go through the SOC 2 audit process. I think because of the way our customers use Clubhouse and the information that they're storing in it, our team decided to pursue SOC 2 type 2 right off the bat. We were, are responsible for being compliant with secure network configuration, encryption by default, auditing and logging, and continuous backup strategies. So going after type 2 like as a first step just made sense. Great. So Justin, can you tell me more about how you used Vanta and Clubhouse to manage the whole audit process?
Yeah, for sure. So to just mitigate a lot of the unknowns and the time it took to gather the evidence, we decided to go with Vanta and get their help in automating a lot of the process. We're really big into automation ourselves because that's our business. We automate customer support. So when we heard that a lot of this SOC 2 process could be automated with Vanta, we were really excited. So their platform actually integrates with a lot of our tooling, such as AWS, GCP, GitHub, and it aggregates all of that evidence and presents it in a nice succinct format to the auditors themselves. So we actually didn't need to be present for a lot of the evidence gathering or handling. And on top of that, Vanta continues to monitor our policies and procedures and controls that we have claimed to do, and such as whether MFA is installed or enabled on AWS or GCP, or whether we have like a vulnerability monitoring in place. Then the platform also suggests additional controls that we could implement or provide evidence for. And even though not all of them apply to us in our SOC 2 audit, we actually could see the full list of options available as for what evidence we could provide that would be relevant for a SOC 2 audit and report. So Vanta was a huge help to us. Of course, we were already using Clubhouse. In fact, we've been using Clubhouse for a number of years. I think we're one of the earlier adopters, and we use it to track all of our product and engineering work. And when we started this SOC 2 process, it just became another work stream that we added in to our normal processes. And so the fact that actually we had multiple people and multiple teams that needed to do something to help with the SOC 2 was great to have that cross collaboration functionality in Clubhouse. And so even though Vanta did a lot of the heavy lifting for us, there were a few things that we had to gather evidence for outside of the Vanta platform. And so it was great to have Clubhouse to help us organize all of that work. We actually created an epic in Clubhouse to track all of our progress and put all the relevant stories in there so that the teams could see what was assigned to who. And it was really great. It just went very smooth. On top of that, Clubhouse actually provides many auditing features that the auditors wanted to see as evidence. So things like the GitHub integration, story labels, story activity, a lot of the fact that you're actually tracking these tasks is what the auditors want to see. And Clubhouse made that really easy and to make sure that they could see that we are reporting incidents and escalations and security issues, that we're actually tracking and reporting them in Clubhouse. And then finally, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just really quickly curious, like, did you invite the auditors in as like an observer then so that they could see the information, or were you adding them as users so they could kind of see like that track of information?
I think we took advantage of the observer functionality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. Cool. Sorry, I did not mean to interrupt you.
That's okay. It's a great question. I was just going to say there's actually a Clubhouse Vanta integration. So, Vanta hooks up to our Clubhouse and looks for any of the stories that are labeled with security or something and makes sure that they are being completed within our SLAs. So the fact that that is kind of hooked up like that is super helpful.
Awesome. So, Justin, we chatted about how you brought on a consultant versus deciding to manage the process in-house. How did you make that decision?
Yeah, that was a really tough one. We're being a small startup, everyone has always been super busy. Nobody has time really to take on another project. It would have for us, it kind of really disrupted our progress to have someone in-house take on the project. So we got a great referral from Vanta actually, and we chose to go with a consultant to completely manage the process for us. And I'm actually really glad we did that. We used a firm called RhymeTech, and they've been absolutely fantastic. Not only did they manage the whole process, but they also did a lot of the required legwork of gathering the evidence and interacting with the auditors. And they also have a wealth of security experience and helped us answer continue to answer security questions from our clients as well. So for us, it's been really, really helpful to be able to kind of offload that to someone else. And I had minimal interaction with the auditor. I definitely needed to talk to the auditor a little bit, but whatever the consultant could do, they did for us, and it was great.
Got it. So, Eric, what advice do you usually give folks who are trying to make that decision? You know, do we bring on a consultant or do we just manage the process in-house?
Yeah, probably 99% of our customers do not use a consultant because they are able to kind of with the help of a customer success team or on their own quarterback their way through the requirements. Within Vanta, we assume a standard set of controls, which Justin mentioned, and make it easy for you to customize those controls depending on whether or not they're applicable to your business. And so for the most part, it's not a decision or a fork in the road that companies who use Vanta have to make. Rather, it's companies who have the resources and would like to offload it that have the luxury per se of working with someone like Justin over at RhymeTech. But for the most part, we try to make it as straightforward as possible so that folks can tackle this and delegate it internally to get it done with minimal lift.
Cool. Good advice. So if anyone does like a quick search online for, you know, a SOC 2 audit timeline, you're going to get a lot of different timelines and framework. This framework that I have up here is a process that Clubhouse used. You know, I think it took us about 3 months, and while that can sound kind of short, the team already had a few of the controls in place. So most of our time was spent in the evidence gathering phase, but that's where Vanta really helped our team sort of accelerate that timeline versus putting a lot of that heavy lifting on us. So Eric, when you look at this framework, do you usually recommend a specific order of operations that needs to be followed, or can the process be more fluid?
Yeah. Once again, like the path that companies decide to take in terms of like getting all their ducks in a row is entirely up to them. We present them with any number of options. I think historically or traditionally, if you're going to go pursue a SOC 2, one of the first things you'll do is if you have someone who's done this before internally, then they'll help kind of design your controls. Many companies will hire a consultant or some other kind of like security expert to come in and help with the control design exercise, excuse me. Within Vanta, as I mentioned, because we assume a standard set of controls, we make it pretty straightforward in terms of kind of like what things you need to do. And we have recommendations in terms of like which order you attack them. Many of our customers will come in and the first things they'll do is they'll use wizards to come in and generate the policies that are required. By kind of filling out these wizards and generating these policies, they're effectively communicating what their controls are. Another early exercise that companies will do is go through a risk assessment where they'll go through and identify different risks associated with different parts of their business, identify tasks they might create to mitigate those risks. And we make all of this visible in a dedicated kind of like auditor platform that we've built. But from there, it's really up to you. It's kind of a choose your own adventure, whether you want to go kind of address the kind of controls tied to vendor management, tied to vulnerability monitoring, tied to kind of managed devices or the other kind of personnel requirements. There's no right or wrong. We'll largely advise folks based on how big their company is and how much kind of progress they've made, right? But generally, what you have in front of you here and the approach that Clubhouse took seems more than reasonable.
Got it. And then do these paths change at all depending on what industry you are, like say financial services versus like a Clubhouse, like a project management software?
Yeah, not necessarily. No, right? It's like at the end of the day, if someone is operating within kind of like the Vanta ecosystem, then as I mentioned, we do make it easy for folks to kind of customize whether it's excluding or including additional controls. But for the most part, at large, the requirements for SOC 2 don't vary company to company, especially when we're dealing with companies that we generally are, which are, you know, on the smaller end of the spectrum.
Got it.
And I will say also, just speaking really quickly to like overall timelines, like, so traditionally, I think if you're going to go get a quote from an auditor, let's say you're a 30-person company, the timeline that they might give you to go from 0 to SOC 2 ready will be in the range of like 4 to 6 months. In the Vanta world, you know, companies are going from like 0 to SOC 2 ready in a span of like 1 to 3 weeks. So really the reason folks are making this decision is because your time is valuable and you'd rather be spending time kind of making the investments, building your business and not doing compliance things. So it's really a time cost savings, which is where solutions like Vanta really come into play.
Awesome. So, Justin, Eric, and I were talking about some of the most important SOC 2 tips, which there are many. Justin, having just finished the SOC 2 process, can you share some of the tips that you found were most important to keep in mind?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, it probably goes without saying, but compliance is just checking the boxes, whereas security is actually doing the right things. Just looking for that list of boxes to check doesn't necessarily make your organization secure. In fact, if you do that, it could leave you in a position that's very far from a secure posture. So obviously we found that by putting security first, compliance just naturally follows. So hopefully that goes without saying. Second, if your organization isn't ready to be compliant, you might be tempted to cut corners to get there. But obviously in the world of security, that's not something you want to do. These aren't corners that you want to cut. It could be really, terrible consequences. So if you're not ready and you need more time, take it. It definitely is an important step in maturing as an organization. And so it's important to do it right. And then also, a lot of people think that, well, I mean, it's true that in some ways security and compliance can be at odds with development, especially if you're trying to develop features and functionality really fast and you're not doing the right things, then, your speed, I would say development speed, is what it could be at odds with. But this is just a fact, and trying to change it won't do either security or development any good. It's important to bake in security at every layer, even if it takes a little extra time. Doing the necessary checks to ensure that you maintain compliance also takes time. There are a ton of tools out there to automate both security and compliance. You can significantly reduce the degree to which these fields are at odds. So any attempt to reduce security in order to speed up development is just not a good idea. And it always, I think, in the end, takes less time if you just do it right the first time. So I'll just, kind of sum it up by saying that my honest recommendation really is to just use Vanta and Clubhouse. And if you have the means to use a consultant like RhymeTech, that's what we did, and it really kind of worked out really, really well.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. My second full-time job, or I guess former second full-time job, was helping companies avoid getting SOC 2, right? Especially these early stage businesses where what we do is we help you figure out how to master the tap dance around the requirements so that, you can focus on building your business. As I mentioned earlier, if you're playing in certain industries, it's just going to be table stakes. And if you hard write it into a contract that you're going to do it, then it also becomes de facto required. That said, look, there are other things that companies can do, right? So I highly recommend early stage companies put up a security page on your website, use kind of human language to describe kind of how you handle data and what you do there as it pertains to security. The other reality here is that look, you're going to get questionnaires forever, even if you have a SOC 2. The value of getting a SOC 2 is that it kind of makes those questionnaires accordion down. So instead of filling out 200 questions, if you can check that top box that says we have a SOC 2, you're going to see a much shorter kind of list of things you need to get through. If you've made the commitment to do a SOC 2, what we highly recommend, one of the first things you're doing is kind of letting people draw straws and kind of assigning a dedicated project manager. Depending on the size of the company, this person can be any number of roles. Companies with fewer than 20 people, we generally see the CTO or a head of engineering taking this responsibility on. That said, within Vanta, one of the value props is that because we're so prescriptive in terms of what tests or controls are passing and failing and how to go fix them, our customers will often delegate the technical remediation to a very junior level engineer. For larger companies, you might have an actual project manager, that is their title, who's leading this. It could be someone in charge of ops, right? At the end of the day, you're going to need the buy-in from the entire company because there's the technical pieces and there are any number of non-technical pieces. And when your company gets quite large, the cat herding, the getting every employee to do security training or background checks or kind of accepting policies can be kind of hairy. We've built kind of tools to help make that easier, but that's still just the reality. So I think once again, just to emphasize, really important to have someone leading the charge on this, and also important to kind of acknowledge that with software and with kind of technology that we've built, it is now possible to delegate this. And once again, like one kind of final tip, which is just, always ask your prospects and partners specifically what type of SOC 2 report they need to see. If they say they don't know, don't accept that answer. Go ask again, have them ask someone else, whoever's making that request. Once again, if traditionally companies needed to start with a type 1 and then go to a type 2 because there was a lack of visibility or there were no monitoring tools like Vanta, today, if you need to go from 0 to SOC 2 type 2, that is a very easy reality. That's what many of our customers do. So yeah, in any case, hopefully that's helpful. But I think Justin nailed the other kind of bits that I would have thrown in there.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So then what happens after you've completed you get SOC 2 certified? Like, what are the next steps?
Yeah, so I can take this. So SOC 2 report lasts for 12 months. It means a great business model for us. And also means that if you're going to get it, then you're also signing up to making a commitment to your company's security posture. So once again, if all you need to do is get a SOC 2 type 1, then effectively, like, using a tool like Vanta, relying on these kind of continuous alerts that we're going to give you, you're effectively bulletproof. Like, you're going to go get a type 1 every 12 months with minimal lift. The same can be said if you need to get a SOC 2 type 2. More often than not, if you're in a pinch and you need to go get a SOC 2 type 2 by a certain time frame, these auditors, these audit partners of ours, they'll work with you on those timelines. That said, if you have a shorter observation period for your first type 2, they'll more often than not want to roll you into a 12-month observation period for your second one. And so once again, if historically you might need to have a call with an auditor every other week to demonstrate evidence tied to things like access controls and making sure people have the right, systems in their hands, et cetera, because we're doing that monitoring and we have the dedicated product for our audit partners, to see this, the lift is still nominal. As it pertains to kind of going beyond SOC 2, once again, it's following the same advice that we kind of give to our prospects, is that, like, go do the things that you're asked for. If you do need to go get an ISO 27001 or a HIPAA certificate, once again, the benefit there is there's a lot of overlap in terms of the controls between those two reports as well as SOC 2. And so today, Vanta's got you fully covered with SOC 2, tomorrow HIPAA, and the next day ISO. So that's kind of how we think about what goes on from there. But I'm curious here kind of how Justin and the Solvvy team have been thinking about that.
Yeah, basically the same. After we saw how really manageable it was using the right tools to achieve this compliance, and also the credibility that it gives our organization, we actually are plowing ahead with other certifications now. And in fact, a lot of the controls we put in place in our path to achieve SOC 2 type 1 overlap with other certifications and frameworks. So for example, we were able to achieve like HIPAA and Privacy Shield just in time for it to be nullified in parallel with our first SOC 2 audit. And our compliance roadmap for the rest of this year actually includes SOC 2 type 2, ISO 27001, and also PCI. So we're going for as much as we can.
That's great. So we put together some resources for everyone to look at after they've listened to all the advice that we've given. The blog post that I mentioned before is linked here. Vanta has some great guides and checklists to help you work through your SOC 2 process. Eric mentioned having a security page is pretty helpful. So, we've shared the Solvvy and the Clubhouse security page here also, so you can take a look. And all these will be sent out to everyone following the webinar by email. So now we're at Q&A time. If you still have a question, feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A button. But let's just go through what we have so far. So what about navigating SOC 2 is the most tricky?
That's a good question. Eric, do you want to start with any?
I think it depends on kind of the approach you take. When we talk to folks who did their first SOC 2 or their second and third SOC 2 before they learned about Vanta, the feedback we always get is that the creating of the policies was the biggest headache. Headache and or cost, right? It's either someone was tasked internally with figuring out how to craft the necessary policies, and or that company had to spend 5 figures on a lawyer to help them get that done. That's probably the simplest and most common answer that we get in terms of like, what is the most arduous part of this process? That said, when we work with bigger companies, the feedback that we get is that it can be very tedious getting all of your employees to go do the personnel requirements. So making sure that everyone has done security training, they've accepted policies, they have managed devices, et cetera. So it really just depends. But up front, where we get the most kind of like aha is in the kind of like the policy generation that we help automate.
Yeah, and I'll say for us, it kind of depends. For us, we already kind of were doing a lot of the technical things. So the technical security pieces of like encryption and backups and all that stuff really wasn't as big a deal. We were actually doing a lot of it already. But if you are not doing those kinds of things, it could be a huge effort to put those in place. I'll also kind of second the personnel tidbits, just because it takes a lot of good hygiene as an organization to do the personnel related things that SOC 2 requires. So if you're kind of not ready for that kind of rigor in terms of personnel processes, that could be some growing pains to go through. But if you're well organized and you try to follow standard processes for onboarding and offboarding and stuff like that, then those things won't be as bad.
So next question, how can someone get a copy of your SOC 2 report?
So for us, SOC 2 report actually includes some proprietary information about our setup, our network, and so we require, and I think this is pretty standard, require an NDA from our to be signed from our prospects. And so typically they'll, someone talking with one of our sales representatives will get that NDA signed, and then we'll send over that SOC 2 report. Usually our sales people will do that.
Yep, I would give the same exact answer.
That's how we do it at Clubhouse as well. Next question is, how long does it typically take a company to get SOC 2?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak anecdotally, right? So having done this now for well over 500 businesses, it's like, it just depends on the size of the org and, how organized you are from like just internally, right? As I said, look, 20-person company, 1 to 3 weeks to go from 0 to SOC 2 ready. And I say SOC 2 ready because, if you're doing a type 2, then that would be the time it might take you to get all your ducks in a row to start that observation period. We work with 24 different auditing firms today, actually maybe more than that now. And these folks are all trained to go into Vanta directly, get everything they need to file these reports. They have a 1 to 2 week SLA turnaround time for actually writing the report after they conduct the audit. But we've seen 500 to 1,000 person companies go from 0 to SOC 2 ready in 3 to 5 weeks. So it really just depends. But in the grand scheme, when you're looking at like that time frame versus what you might get traditionally, you're looking at like a factor of 10 in terms of like less time involved.
Justin, I'm curious how long it took you all at Solvvy to go through the process.
Yeah, I think ours was more similar to what you said Clubhouse was, a few months. We didn't have any strict externally, demanded deadlines. And so we kind of took our sweet time and so it, we started the process. It took about 3 months to kind of get all the ducks in a row. And then the audit period, like you said, was a couple of weeks and then a week or two to get the report.
And so Eric, when you're like working with clients, who's typically owning SOC 2 internally?
Yeah, so it really depends on the size of the org. Companies fewer than 20 people, odds are it's like a CTO or a co-founder who is like kind of executive, kind of like owning the project. As the companies get bigger, it might be a head of engineering who is kind of overseeing this. We've worked with lots of kinds of operations managers, COOs, sometimes even heads of legal who kind of, once again, like we're just kind of put to the task here. So it really depends org to org. We see it all, but I will say for like smaller companies like sub 50 people, it's not uncommon for a CTO or head of engineering to kind of be the one making sure that, you know, all the pieces are moving in cohesion.
Got it. Justin, any tips that you have for using Clubhouse for the SOC 2 process?
Yeah, just make sure anyone involved kind of has a, you know, an account in Clubhouse so everyone can see what's going on. Create an epic, put stories in there for every task. Even if someone like, I don't know, a lawyer is not, you know, typically in Clubhouse, just even track the task. Everything has stories in there so that everyone can see how far you are and how things are going. Other than that, you know, we actually take advantage of different projects, and so it was nice to be able to have everything under an epic, even though the tasks were required to be done by a few different people. And so it was under different projects. It was still all tracked under one epic. So it's just really flexible, kind of use it to make it work for your organization.
I will say eating our own dog food. We're going through our type 2 again right now. And we are also using Clubhouse. So thank you, Tiffany.
I love hearing that. In terms of budgeting for SOC 2, Eric, any tips around that?
Yeah. Once again, for better or worse, pricing today is largely based on like the size of the business, and then from an audit standpoint, whether you're doing a type 1 or type 2, you know, safely, I would budget in anywhere from 20 to 40K, depending on the size of the business. You know, if you're and that's an all-in cost. So, you know, early stage companies, you know, you're 2 to 50 people, like you're going to be on the lower end. Companies on the higher end, you know, expect to pay a bit more. I will say when you work with Vanta, there are 2 fees, right? So there's the Vanta kind of software fee, and then there's the auditor filing fee. And for reasons of independence, those are 2 separate fees. And so when we work with folks, their all-in costs largely depends on what they value from the audit side. So are you optimizing for costs, for brand, for timing, et cetera? Fortunately, we have any number of options that we can help kind of meet the prospects or the customers where they need to be. But it's that auditor fee that just much more variable per se.
Got it. So there's another like follow-up question to what you just described, Eric, which is, you know, what can a smaller company expect to spend with an external auditor for SOC type 2 audit?
Yep. So that'll range. The folks that we work with have all agreed to fixed discounts for Vanta customers. On the low end, you're looking at, you know, 10 to 12K. On the high end, you're looking at, you know, 50K plus if you're a bigger company working with, you know, one of the big 4 partners that we work with. So it really depends.
Got it. Thank you. I just want to make sure that there's so a follow-up to the external auditor question is, in which areas can a smaller company save the most time and money by preparing ahead of time?
Use Vanta. I mean, candidly, right? Like we will do a gap assessment here for you and literally 4 API connections. But if you want to get out in front of it, you know, go kind of make sure that, you know, your kind of databases are encrypted, that you have multi-factor, you know, for every kind of authentication that your employees might have as it pertains to like connecting to your, you know, version control system, your cloud infrastructure, et cetera. We have a checklist that we've published, which we'll make available, which also kind of gives some tips and tricks. There are other heavier lift things, which, you know, it just really depends. You know, you could start trying to take a stab at writing these policies if you really want to get out in front of it. I think your time is better spent kind of leaning into a solution like Vanta. But, you know, once again, I recognize that every company has different resources available at their disposal. So it really depends.
Yeah, I think having been at Clubhouse through the whole SOC 2 process and having been at other companies where we've gone through a SOC 2 audit, you know, I noticed that, again, I wasn't super involved in the process, but the amount of time that we talked about the SOC 2 process and being done was probably half the time that we spent at another company where we didn't use a piece of software to sort of automate everything. And I think, you know, time is money, and being able to have a lot of the heavy lifting automated is where like I saw a lot of value for sure.
Yeah, and I'll also jump in and say that we, you know, we are very cost conscious, even though we did decide to go with the external consultant. Actually, it ended up being cheaper, less expensive to use Vanta plus an auditor plus the consultant than actually some of the other quotes that we were getting from an external auditor without using Vanta. So, because if you don't use Vanta, there's just a lot more work that the auditors have to go through to gather the evidence, and so they'll bill you for that. And this was actually the most cost-effective way to do it for us.
Totally. So I have a question here about the Clubhouse and Vanta integration, and specifically about an easy click button issue creation that pushes from Vanta to Clubhouse.
Yeah, this is funny. This is a common request that we get. This is let's call it like a more downstream feature that we'll build. So right now, with all the task trackers that we connect to, we're able to go in and like look for and identify that you create and close out security related tasks. Some folks would love for those task tracker integration to go one step further, and for you to actually assign kind of Vanta tests or tasks to the creation of different, like let's say Clubhouse tickets that are owned by certain people. We'll build these things. As far as the timeline on it, TBD. But as it is today, we allow folks to be really granular with the types of like email alerts that they get when certain tasks fail and who gets those alerts.
Thanks, Eric. That looks like all of the questions. I'll give folks about like another minute if they have any others. We can just sit in silence, or you know,
Well,
we can all talk.
One other thing I'll add, which it was on kind of the tips page, and it had to do with like auditors, you know, not being scary. I think that is a common misconception. You know, look, the reality is we lean really hard into our audit partners. We think of them as true partners. You know, they are the ones that are going to be filing and writing your SOC report. And so we like pretty firmly believe that it's important for you to be aligned with them from day one. And so when we think about supporting companies, yes, sure, we take the land, sea, and air approach where like you're going to get a customer success manager, your salesperson will be available, we have dedicated support, but also we make sure that you're aligned with and have selected an auditor that you're happy with from the very beginning, just so that there are no surprises along the way. And so once again, I will say that even I came into this thinking that like auditors, and I'm friends with a lot of auditors, but as it turns out, they're normal people too, and you know, they're a good resource to lean on and to work with, especially as it pertains to like kind of making sure that you are buttoned up. So I just want to reiterate that fact.
I'll second that. We interviewed I think a couple different auditing firms. We had a few different to choose from that were introduced to us by Vanta and our consultant, and we decided not to go with one just because we didn't really jive well, I think, personality wise. And the one we ended up going with, we were really happy with, and we just kind of got along really well. They were very reasonable, and everything worked out great.
So actually, one last question popping in. This question is, are there any complementary cybersecurity frameworks that will help make pursuing SOC 2 easier?
Yeah, I mean, in short, there's a lot of overlapping controls between ISO 27001 and SOC 2 at large. I think the general feedback we get is that pursuing a SOC 2 and getting a SOC 2 is much easier, and something you can get much faster than ISO. But look, if you're based in Europe or the bulk of your customers are based in Europe and ISO is what you're being asked to get, then there's something to be said about going for that. And if you do have that in place, then getting SOC 2 will be much easier. Also at large, like when you think about these kind of broad stroke security questionnaires that you might get, if you are able to answer those, as it stands, then you should know that like you're in a better position than not to come in and like hit the ground running when you start working towards a SOC 2.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. So I don't see any more questions coming through, so we'll go ahead and wrap things up. If you do have any follow-up questions, we are going to be sending an email out, and I'll make sure that I include Justin and Eric's information in there, as well as mine, in case you have any questions that you want to reach out to us about individually. As I said before, we'll follow up with an email. It'll include this deck, which will have a link to all the resources that we shared earlier, as well as a recording of the entire webinar. I want to thank Justin and Eric for joining me today and for taking the time to kind of pull all of this information together. You know, it can be a very overwhelming process, I'm sure, for many people. And you know, I hope and we hope that you all walk away from this more prepared and excited to take on your SOC 2 audits. So yeah, and on behalf of Justin, Eric, and myself, thanks to everyone on the call for joining.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks.
Take care. Bye.